Hello again. I'm Steve Flanders once again. This is 15 Minutes to Save America, episode number 9. We're going to start getting into the First Amendment here, which is, unlike the rest of this, kind of controversial. Because the First Amendment's been completely flipped on its head. Start out with the truth that separation of church and state is a myth. It is not possible to achieve, and it's very dangerous to pursue. And I'll start talking about why that's so. Best way to proceed is, let's go back to the 1960s. And there was a statement, there was a phrase back in the 60s, you can't legislate morality, which sounds great, but like a lot of the stuff out of the 60s, there's kind of a faux wisdom to it that really doesn't stand up. Sure, you can't pass a law that's going to force people to change their minds. That's true. But when you look at it, it turns out all laws, from laws against murder and theft to laws against fraud, zoning, everything, education is always based on and informed by somebody's unproven set of moral assumptions, okay? Can't get away from it. Best way to explain this is to look at education, especially elementary school education. You go to kindergarten, first thing you start learning is to line up and to take turns. The boys go to the little boys' room, the girls go to the little girls' room. Who says? These days, the trans stuff, well, that actually proves my point, because even if you come in with that trans stuff, there's still somebody's opinions that are going to have the weight of law. Get back to the little kids, who says they shouldn't fight? Who says we should discourage violence? Maybe some people think their kids would be better off if they did learn to fight from an early age about anything. So we come to the point where we realize there does have to be some morality, both in our education and in forming our laws and in every aspect of society. That's one of the first things that went into the formation of the First Amendment. Writing the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, who some people might not think much of these days. They think all kinds of bad things about him, and maybe they're right. I haven't seen definitive proof that he was a bad man, but I haven't seen definitive proof that anybody's a good man. Anyway, right after he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he went back to the Virginia House of Burgesses, where he was a member, and rose to call for the disestablishment of the Church of England in England. And his famous statement from that debate was, to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical. There's a lot of truth in that. And so then you start looking at, well, how are we going to not impose values and beliefs on people if we're making these decisions at the national level? So the question becomes not only whose values are going to be imposed, but what is the most appropriate level of government to do that imposing on? That's where we got to with the First Amendment and what it actually means, okay? And that's what this first episode is about, is what the First Amendment means and how it's supposed to be used. This 9th episode. The debate about the First Amendment, first of all, it wasn't written by the people that wrote the Constitution. It was written by the first Congress, which met in 1789. James Madison rose in September 1789 when a lot of the urgent business was done, and started the discussion about the Bill of Rights, which had been, a lot of people, when they voted for the Constitution, did so with the stipulation that there'd be some sort of Bill of Rights added. They weren't real clear on exactly what, but he rose and started proposing Bill of Rights. And The First Amendment was originally two amendments, okay, and it went back and forth in the House and the Senate as two amendments. One covered religion, the other covered speech and press. Over time, toward the end, they got consolidated. But there's a book called Religious Liberty in America by Glenn T. Miller. The bibliography and the references in the link I will share at the end. But he wrote this: the history of the wording of the first clause of the First Amendment is significant for its interpretation. The House of Representatives first adopted this reading: Congress shall make no law establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor shall the rights of conscience be abridged. This was the most comprehensive form proposed. Two problems appeared in the Senate. The first problem was a movement to change the wording in the direction of permitting a multiple establishment of religion throughout the nation. One form that this proposal took was, quote, Congress shall make no law establishing any particular denomination of religion in preference to another, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor shall the rights of conscience be abridged. This was defeated. This was defeated. This is in the defeat of calling for rights of conscience. I'll get back to reading this. You can see that this was where secularism was even being proposed at the founding. It's important to recognize that it was proposed and rejected. Okay, to continue on with this quote from Religious Liberty in America. This was defeated. The second problem was a concern that the federal government not be permitted to interfere with the religious establishments where they either existed or might exist. This concern shaped the wording decisively. The section on the rights of conscience was deleted, and stress was placed on the prohibition of congressional action. The Senate sent this version to the House. Congress shall make no law establishing articles of faith or a mode of worship or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Since this leaned too far in the direction of the New England type of holy commonwealth, the House finally passed this version. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The Senate concurred. In its final form, the First Amendment was designed to prevent any federal interference with religion. As an aside before I finish this, the final consolidation of the two amendments took place in a conference committee between the House and the Senate. And I have yet to get a hold of the record of that conference committee. That's the next time I go to D.C., I'll try to look for that. Anyway, in its final form, the First Amendment was designed to prevent any federal interference with religion. Congress could not pass a law establishing a church, nor could it pass a law disestablishing a church. The question of faith was, thus, reserved to the states for their action and their action alone. Should it prove necessary to pass laws regulating religion, as it would if the churches were to hold property, they would be state laws. That's the end of that passage. This is pretty radical stuff. See, the founders didn't propose some sort of separation of church and state that applied to the states. They felt the states, in 9 of the original states, did have established religions. Okay, it fell out of fashion, but it was never considered unconstitutional. And they didn't try to stop the establishment of any kind of religious activity at the state level. They just didn't want any religion being established at the federal level, nor did they want the Congress interfering with what was established at the state level. So that separation of church and state, the way we use it today, was never on their minds. And preventing what quote unquote theocracy was never on their mind. They just didn't want to have a federal establishment, which is really very wise. Okay. Now, to confirm this, I'm going to once again resort to Mr. Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was vice president under John Adams, and when John Adams and the Adams administration put forth the Alien and Sedition Acts, which started making certain speech and press illegal, Thomas Jefferson anonymously wrote the Kentucky resolutions in opposition. He did it anonymously because he didn't feel like it was, appropriate for a vice president to publicly oppose his president. But he did publish it in Kentucky, and there's some real shocking ideas in it. In the third of the three Kentucky resolutions, he said this. This is just the snippets. That no power over the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, or freedom of the press being delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, all lawful powers respecting the same did of right remain and were reserved to the states or the people, that thus was manifested their determination to retain to themselves the right of judging how far the licentiousness of speech and of the press may be abridged without lessening their useful freedom, and how far those abuses which cannot be separated from their use should be tolerated rather than the use be destroyed. Speech and press are supposed to be the province of the states. That's where, you used to have books banned in Boston. You used to have state laws against pornography. You used to have state laws against burning the flag, okay? Going on in the Kentucky resolutions, there's a second passage which also caught my eye. In addition to this general principle and express declaration, and the more special provision had been made by one of the amendments to the Constitution, which expressly declares that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, unquote, thereby guarding in the same sentence and under the same words the freedom of religion, of speech, and of the press, insomuch that whatever violated either throws down the sanctuary which covers the others, and that libels, falsehood, and defamation, equally with heresy and false religion, are withheld from the cognizance of federal tribunals. That means that's a subject that federal courts are not to even think about. It is not to come into their cognizance, into their mind, into their attention. That is exactly how it was supposed to be. That's exactly how it was for the longest time. And then it got changed. And I'll talk about that. But first, to confirm what Jefferson just said, this is even easier to look up. This is from his second inaugural address. In matters of quote, in matters of religion, I have considered that its free exercise is placed by the Constitution independent of the powers of the general government. I have therefore undertaken, on no occasion, to prescribe the religious exercises to it, but have left them as the Constitution found them, under the direction and discipline of state or church authorities acknowledged by the several religious societies, end quote. So, Thomas Jefferson, it wasn't just during the heat of the battle with John Adams. This is really what he saw the First Amendment meaning. He's the guy that wrote the phrase, separation of church and state. But he did not mean it the way we have it today. He did mean that the states were to be free to be their own moral self-governors. Now, as to what happened to it and how it got torn apart, that's the subject of the next episode. But to once again resort to Mr. Glenn T. Miller and Religious Liberty in America, quote, these problems arose after the passage of the 14th Amendment broadened the authorities of the federal government. They would not have arisen under the original wording of the Constitution and the First Amendment, nor would many of the issues that divide us today have arisen under it. To cite one example, if the state of New Jersey had chosen to promote religious rather than public education, it would have been entirely within the constitutional provisions to do so. It is not surprising, therefore, that few cases concerning religious matters reached the Supreme Court before the Civil War. The only thing I'm going to add to that is that it wasn't a proper reading of the 14th Amendment that brought us to this pass. It was a major blunder by the Supreme Court, and it happened really, it was consolidated and put into place in 1947. But that's the next episode. At this point, once again, thanks for watching, and be sure and share and follow. Thank you. Sorry for going so long. Once again, just a real quick wrap up. The blog site is lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com. There's where you want to go to read the whole thing. If you want to read ahead, everything's on there. And everything about the First Amendment, I went into how the First Amendment was stolen. .html is the posting for what's happened with the First Amendment. That was episode 9. And 9 and 10 and 11 are also going to be on the First Amendment. Be sure and share and follow.